attacks, setting off alarm bells in the Kremlin. The day before yesterday, an attack landing ship. A number of small rocket launchers and minesweepers were sent to Theodosia. Meanwhile, military researchers and specialists continue to weigh in on Ukraine and air defense systems, preparing Crimea for a new wave of attacks. All of this has hampered Crimea's ability to serve as a launchpad for Russian operations. All eyes are once again on the Black Sea Peninsula in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. Russian formations in Crimea have recently suffered significant damage as a result of missile and drone attacks, setting off alarm bells in the Kremlin. The day before yesterday was a highly lively and hot day in Crimea. A massive explosion occurred late last night in Sevastopol, a city briefly controlled by Russian soldiers in Crimea. A fire allegedly broke out when the plane landed. The Crimean Wind Telegram channel reported this, citing local people. The explosion was heard around 10:50 p.m., according to neighborhood neighbors. Also, something was burning in the direction of Bakhchisarai, according to residents. Photos shared on social media following the incident showed fire at the scene. Local media reported on social media that the alarm in Sevastopol had not been activated and that explosions could be heard from the college area. The explosion in Sevastopol has yet to be reported on by Russian officials in the region. We previously reported that an explosion occurred in the Zonkoy region just a day before the blast in Sevastopol. At 5:50 p.m., Ukrainian forces launched missile and drone strikes on Crimea, targeting the railway hub of Zonkoy. Strong explosions were heard in Zonkoy, and locals stated that an air raid alert had been issued at Zonkoy airport. Photographs uploaded on social media showed the rockets flying inverted in the sky. Following the explosion, Russian officials temporarily shut down the Crimean bridge. Today, Ukrainian Defense Intelligence reported a missile attack on Russian troops' men and vehicles in Zonkoy. According to Defense Intelligence, there were casualties among the Russian occupants, although the exact number has yet to be determined. Crimea is already trembling as a result of daily attacks that are escalating tensions on the peninsula. With the escalation of the attacks on Crimea, Russian authorities are hastening their departure from the peninsula and relocating major assets to safer locations. One of the most major partisan networks in Crimea, the Fire Military Partisan Movement, continues to monitor the overall situation on the peninsula and reports significant developments on its social media channels. The Fire Movement's most recent announcement was rather astonishing. According to the Fire Movement, Russians in Crimea are frightened of transporting military boats by sea, therefore, they do so via truck. Partisans released a video showing a military boat being transported by truck from Feodosia to the depths of Crimea. Because of the camouflage, the actual type of boat could not be identified. According to partisans, the occupiers are scared of watercraft, even on the peninsula's eastern side. This is hardly surprising, given that such Russian anxieties have been prevalent for a long time. The relocation of the Black Sea Fleet, for example, was the most visible embodiment of these fears. The initial Planet Labs satellite photographs revealed that the number of Russian ships in Crimea has dropped, and the Russian Black Sea Fleet's core is no longer in Sevastopol. The majority of Russian ships have relocated to Novorossiysk, south of Crimea. 3 submarines, 2 missile launchers, and a patrol ship were among those relocated to Novorossiysk. Smaller, less essential ships were transferred to Theodosia, an attack landing ship. A number of small rocket launchers and minesweepers were sent to Theodosia. Meanwhile, military researchers and specialists continue to weigh in on Ukraine's actions in Crimea. According to the Institute for the Study of War, Ukraine's offensive campaign against Russian military installations in Crimea humiliated but did not defeat Moscow's Black Sea Fleet. The US-based think tank recently stated in a special report that, while the Black Sea Fleet's position as a combined arms headquarters has deteriorated, many of its assets can still be deployed in conflict. The Black Sea Fleet, according to ISW, appears to be a solely naval force, but it is actually a huge combined arms formation comprised of surface-to-surface missile batteries, air defenses, and troops. Ukraine launched a series of long-range missile and drone strikes against the Black Sea Fleet in September, targeting a shipyard, the fleet headquarters in Sevastopol, and docking warships. As we said in our video, the strikes appear to be effective. Russia evacuated 2 frigates, 3 submarines, 5 landing craft, and countless small ships from Sevastopol earlier this month. The ISW, on the other hand, stated that it is too early to say whether the Black Sea Fleet has been damaged. Nonetheless, the withdrawal represents a big win for Ukraine. Russia has largely lost its ability to obstruct a crucial shipping channel that Ukraine built this summer in the Black Sea. Ukrainian attacks have badly damaged certain Russian airfields and air defense systems, preparing Crimea for a new wave of attacks. All of this has hampered Crimea's ability to serve as a launchpad for Russian operations in southern Ukraine, where Moscow has been battling Kiev's counteroffensive for months. Meanwhile, excellent news from southern Ukraine continues to arrive. Kopani Rabatin and Novo-Prokopivka are engaged in fierce combat. A recently released film from the area shows numerous launch rocket systems shelling a tree. This video demonstrates that the attack's target has become numerous places at once, which is too large for advancement. According to other sources, the firing was carried out by Russian artillery in the area of Ukrainian attacks. This is consistent with Russian reports that Ukrainian soldiers are still attacking Kopani. For the 3rd day in a row, Russian sources admitted to losing land in this region. This points to a positive dynamic for Ukrainians right now. Some Russian commentators have begun to raise the alarm over the situation, even claiming that the Ukrainians will soon breach Russian lines and attack Russian forces in Anka from behind. However, as you may recall, the fundamental goal of the westward march is to exclude a successful Russian flank strike. And, while the Ukrainians did not clear the entire elevated platform west of Rabatin, it was reported today that the Ukrainians were successful in destroying the Russians. The Russian flank offensive crossed this woodland line directly, leading to the huge network of trenches between Rabatin and Novo-Prokopivka. When the Ukrainians organized a second wave of attacks on Novo-Prokopivka, the Russians chose to attack as well, leaving them defenseless. Meanwhile, geolocated film showed Ukrainian forces effectively pushing in this direction while the Russians shelled the row of trees just in front of the houses where the Ukrainians were switching positions. Meanwhile, the Russians mounted a surprise attack. The goal of this attack was to seize control of the trenches, cut off the Ukrainian assault battalions in Novo-Prokopivka from the mainland, and ultimately capture and destroy them. Unfortunately for the Russians, Ukrainian forces from the 47th Mechanized Brigade are perfectly prepared to face this attack. The Ukrainians began targeting the Russian tanks with kamikaze drones as they appeared on the horizon, nearly 2.5 kilometers distant from the trench network, according to geolocated footage. The first Russian tank was destroyed before it could even penetrate the wooded area that led to the Ukrainian defenses. Other Russian tanks and armored vehicles were able to approach the fortifications. When the first in line was hit and rendered immobile, the Russian forces realized they were too far away from the trenches to continue the offensive and began fleeing in all directions. When the tank at the back noticed that the assault unit was nearly destroyed, it began to turn back. A few seconds later, the tank was hit straight in the engine and mobilized as well. The wrecked Russian tanks are scattered around the wooded area, but labor continues in the fields west of Robotyne. According to a warrior from the 24th Assault Brigade, Ukrainians are making gains on the flanks. Similar Russian offensives in this region will conclude faster and with greater devastation after the fields are cleared. Furthermore, Alexander Stupin, spokesman for the Joint Press Center of the Tavria Defense Forces, reported that Ukrainian defenders had one partial success in the Zaporizhzhia district west of Verbova. According to Stupin, activity in the Tavria direction has recently declined marginally, with 18 fights documented in the last 24 hours. The weather and the prospect that the adversary will partially regroup were cited as reasons by the spokeswoman. The Russian occupants lost 147 units of people and 6 units of military equipment in the designated sector of the front. In some cases, the Russian army's losses are mounting by the day, which gives the Ukrainians a significant advantage. As the Black Sea has become the most intense battleground in Russia's current Ukrainian war, Moscow has taken a step back. First, Russia chose to evacuate its navy ships from Crimea and place them in safe harbors away from the fighting lines. Then it began looking for a new home for its fleet. Faced with Ukrainian counterattacks in Crimea, Russia agreed to build a new military station in the Black Sea alongside Abkhazia. Russia's action in the Black Sea is being keenly monitored by the countries in the vicinity. Ukraine has recently increased its attacks, particularly on the Crimean Peninsula. Ukraine regards Crimea as a holy objective. Ukraine has created a sense of insecurity among Russian forces by demonstrating that it can take Crimea militarily, and this has pushed Russia to kidnap the Black Sea Fleet. The Navy has taken a number of hits in recent weeks as Kiev intensifies its push to retake the Black Sea Peninsula captured by Putin. In 2014, Kiev launched a missile attack on the Black Sea Fleet headquarters in Sevastopol, reportedly killing several senior officers as part of preparations for the offensive to free the peninsula. Following this, a Ukrainian missile attack on the Sevastopol shipyard damaged a Russian submarine and cruise missile carrier, the Rostov-on-Don, which was being repaired, as well as a huge cruiser, the Minsk. Following the strikes, satellite photographs revealed that some of the Black Sea Fleet's larger ships were stationed at a naval base near Novorossiysk, with lesser ships based in Theodosia. Russia's Black Sea Fleet is seen fleeing from the Crimean ports of Sevastopol to Novorossiysk in Krasnodar Krai in southern Russia and the Russian naval ports of Theodosia on the seized peninsula, according to new satellite pictures. Images provided by 3 Russian mill bloggers on October 4th and 5th show that many of the Black Sea Fleet's heaviest ships have docked at a naval facility near Novorossiysk, while smaller ships are now based in Feodosia. According to experts close to Ukraine's defense ministry, Kiev has initiated a campaign to disarm the Black Sea Fleet as part of its efforts to free Crimea, which Russian President Vladimir Putin annexed in 2014. Russia's frigates Admiral Essen and Admiral Makarov, 3 diesel submarines, 5 large landing ships, 6 small missile ships, 1 large landing ship, a minesweeper, and several small ships are seen being transferred from Sevastopol in the photos. The Ukrainian military reportedly stated that Russia kept the ships moving after the attacks. As you may be aware, Ukraine conducted a missile attack on Russia's Black Sea Fleet's headquarters in Sevastopol on September 22, killing numerous senior officers. According to the UK Ministry of Defence, the naval aviation component of Russia's Black Sea Fleet has taken on a particularly crucial role in its operations in recent weeks as it strives to cope with simultaneous threats on the southern flank of the ground battle in Ukraine. According to the intelligence report, naval air patrol activities are becoming increasingly significant, most likely with the primary mission of detecting crewless surface ships early. The B-12 masculine amphibious aircraft, designed in the 1950s and operating from bases in seized Crimea, is a major Russian asset in these operations, according to the statement. Su-24 Fencer and Flanker fighter jets have been conducting maritime attack operations, including at least one recent airstrike on Snake Island, which is strategically positioned. With more Black Sea Fleet forces expected to be deployed to Novorossiysk, in the face of threats to Sevastopol, Russia is attempting to project force over the northwestern Black Sea, according to the Defense Ministry. Former Ukrainian military minister and current ministry advisor Andrei Zagorodniak stated Russia's surviving Black Sea ships are old and antiquated. He also mentioned that they were all created a long time ago and had some serious issues with weaponry and equipment, etc. He went on to say that replacing destroyed or heavily damaged ships would take years, not months. Satellite footage, however, suggests that 4 Russian landing ships and a 1K-class submarine are still in Sevastopol. According to ISW experts, satellite data from October 4 shows the Project 22160 patrol vessel for the first time in the eastern Crimean port of Theodosia, implying that Russian forces may be relocating BSF components from Sevastopol to locations in Russia's rear. Following several strikes on BSF assets in and near Sevastopol, Russian forces may temporarily relocate some ships to Navarro, Sisk, but they will most likely continue to utilize the port of Sevastopol as the BSF base, according to SW analysts. Meanwhile, Russia is looking for a new permanent naval station on Abkhazia's Black Sea coast after satellite photographs revealed President Vladimir Putin's Black Sea fleet evacuating occupied Crimea, according to a regional official. According to reports, Russia has agreed to create a permanent naval station in the Black Sea coastal separatist territory of Abkhazia. Yesterday, Aslan Bazanya, the head of Georgia's separatist territory of Abkhazia, met with Russian President Vladimir Putin. "We negotiated a deal, and the Russian Navy will have a permanent deployment site in the Akamkaira region in the near future," Bazanya told a Russian newspaper. "The goal of all of this is to strengthen Russia's and Abkhazia's defense capacities, and such engagement will continue." While this news drew a lot of attention, it was viewed as Russia looking for a replacement for the attacked port of Sevastopol. Russia had sent its Black Sea fleet to Sevastopol on the Crimean Peninsula, which it had acquired from Ukraine in 2014. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Ukrainian soldiers have regularly targeted the Navy. In recent weeks, Ukrainian commandos have also attempted daring landings on jet skis in Crimea. However, Russia has declared that these attempts have failed. The announcement that Russia intends to build a permanent naval station in Abkhazia is certain to raise eyebrows. It is also worth noting that Moscow is extending its naval force towards the Turkish border with this latest move. When there was talk of a Russian base in Akamkaira in 2009, NATO, which includes the Black Sea littoral republics of Turkey, Bulgaria, and Romania, expressed worry. The area declared independence in 1999 but is still recognized globally as Georgian. Russia declared Abkhazia an independent state after Moscow's victory in the Russo-Georgian War. The West accused Russia of de facto annexing the territory in 2008. On the other hand, the Ukrainian army, which continues to carry out plans to assault Russian installations, attacked Sevastopol from the sea and the Belgorod region from the air. Mikhail Rosvozev, governor of Sevastopol in the Republic of Crimea, announced that the Ukrainian military launched an attack with unmanned assault boats. According to reports, the Ukrainian military tried an attack in the Severny Mol neighborhood of Sevastopol using 2 unmanned attack boats. Rosvozev reported hearing loud noises around Severny Mol in the early morning. These are the Black Sea Fleet's anti-submarine support squads. According to preliminary findings, they are repelling an attack by 2 unmanned attack boats. In short, following all of these occurrences, Russia has questioned whether it is taking a step back in the Black Sea. At the daily press conference, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov was also questioned about the charges. According to Peskov, the Kremlin press staff has no jurisdiction over this matter. For an answer, contact the Russian Ministry of Defense. Peskov gave an evasive response, almost as if he couldn't think of anything to say. As you can see from our agenda reports, the most recent developments in the Israel-Palestine conflict jolted the global agenda. The war with Ukraine, meanwhile, continues. The Ukrainian military continues to launch counteroffensive operations at breakneck speed. According to the most recent information, the Ukrainian armed forces' counteroffensive operations continue unabated at 5 sites on the front line. The developments on the Zaporizhzhia-France line, in particular, demonstrated that the Russian force is gradually deteriorating. When the century came to an end and the period of struggle started, what was the most current situation on the front lines of the war that marked the beginning of the period of conflict? Let's get together and have a look at what's going on, shall we? Our team is putting in a lot of effort to bring you action from the front lines. If you make use of Super Thank You, you may lend a hand to our team, which works diligently to ensure that the reports it generates adequately compensate for their efforts. Let's start out with the most recent advancements that have been made on the Zaporizhzhia-France line. There have been claims that the Ukrainian army has made significant advancements in the western regions of Raboti. The map reveals that Russian troops have been laboring diligently in the region for a considerable amount of time in order to keep their defensive lines intact. The majority of Russian troops had fled toward Rabotny's western outskirts from the city's core. The Ukrainian military was exerting efforts to gain ground in the region they were in. Because of the difficult position that the Russian soldiers were in, the Russian Air Force was sent to the area. The deployment of the Russian Air Force to the region is an important aspect to take into consideration. This circumstance illustrates that, contrary to widespread perception, the Ukrainian armed forces have gained a great deal of success in recent years. As a direct result of the assaults launched by the Ukrainian army, Russian infantry forces stationed in the region are in need of support from the Russian Air Force. The Russian military started to draw down their forces. Because of the aid provided by the Russian Air Force, Ukrainian infantry units' attacks have been thwarted in a few different scenarios. It was predetermined for this to take place. On the other hand, we are able to forecast that the Ukrainian armed forces will restart their assault in the Novoprokopivka region at a moment that is unexpected. The same may be said for the state of the Ukrainian armed forces. According to what can be seen on the map, Ukrainian forces have made great headway in the direction of Novoprokopivka. The ongoing encirclement of Russian positions in this region by Ukrainian soldiers continues. The most recent data indicate that the level of violence in the region's geographic center has dramatically increased. Artillery forces from Ukraine are performing duties that are absolutely necessary in this region. The assaults from the Ukrainian artillery units caused the Russian forces to become weary, and this state of exhaustion has not yet been reversed. In response to the artillery fire, the infantry of the Ukrainian army also mobilized, effectively surrounding the Russian troops. On the other hand, we have a problem with the verb line that is analogous to the previous one. Heavy artillery fire from the Ukrainian side is also being heard coming from this region. Through these assaults, artillery battalions belonging to the Ukrainian side have substantially worn down the defenses of the Russian side. A significant number of Russian soldiers and pieces of equipment were wiped down by Ukrainian military formations as well, by means of their coordinated assaults. Within the next few days, it's possible that the Ukrainian army will conquer large regions along the Zaporizhzhia front line. However, additional reinforcements for the Ukrainian army are going to be necessary for this operation to go forward. The number of Russian troops killed or captured in the region is likely to rise if greater support is given to the Ukrainian armed forces. Let's move on to talking about the artillery fire immediately. According to the most recent sources, Russian artillery units have only responded to attacks launched by the Ukrainian military. The Russian outposts of Kopani, Zlatka, Baka, Ichenko, and Novobodrovka were the targets of artillery fire from the Ukrainian side. Let's move forward with the advancements that have been made in the older area along the Zaporizhzhia-France line. Reports from the area indicate that Russian troops have begun an assault against Ukrainian positions in Novodonetsk and Nikolskoye. Within the area, the Ukrainian army took the initiative to act. Even though Russian forces launched vicious strikes, they were unable to make any headway in this territory against the persistent efforts of the Ukrainian army, which continues to pursue this objective. The Ukrainian Defense Force was able to successfully repel the attacks from the Russian Federation. In addition, heavy casualties were sustained by Russian military personnel throughout these assaults. After this raid, Ukrainian soldiers gathered in the region and immediately began a heavy barrage against the Russian forces that were there. Recent sources indicate that a significant number of Russian personnel are currently waiting for authorization to depart the area. However, I have my doubts that the Russian military leadership will issue such an order since we have been in similar situations in the past, and each time the Russian military leadership has chosen to risk losing a large number of personnel, ammunition, and vehicles rather than making a tactical withdrawal. I have doubts that they will issue such an order because of this. We are assuming that the leadership of Russia's armed forces will come to the same conclusion this time around. It is imperative that we do not overlook the artillery operations. According to the most recent reports, the Russian army targeted Ukrainian troops near the traumatized European cities of Novodonetsk and Nikolaevsky. In response, Ukrainian troops attacked Russian fortifications in Idimbajania, Isharmalinka, and Novodonetsk. Let us now examine the most recent Donetsk happenings. First, let's zoom in on the Donetsk frontline. Recent reports indicate that Russian forces, backed by artillery and air forces, have continued their approach close to Novo-Mykolovka and Marianka. The Russian military has been supporting this offensive. The Russian officials claim that the air bombardment led to the collapse of some of the fortifications that were located in Ukraine. Despite this, Ukrainian authorities have not yet commented on these reports. None of the international organizations that are independently working to monitor the region have verified these claims. In addition, Ukrainian forces have been successful in putting up a fight against Russian troops during Russian armed forces attacks on the southern approaches of Avdiivka, located along the Donetsk frontline. It would appear that the overwhelming superiority enjoyed by the Ukrainian defense forces in the region has been maintained. I claim that there is an overwhelming superiority since the Russian army is unable to make headway in this region despite having a substantial number of troops and supports at its disposal. Do you think this shows that Ukraine has an overwhelming superiority over the other countries' armed forces in the region? I am not in a position to provide a lot of information regarding the artillery activity that is taking place on the Donetsk frontline today due to the fact that artillery units from both sides have been relatively quiet in the area over the past few days. Let's take a look at the most recent occurrences that have taken place on the Bachmut frontline. The Russian military personnel are still maintaining their positions to the south of Palmd. Russian troops stationed in the area frequently launch assaults in an effort to seize control of Andreyivka and Klitschko. The most recent reports indicate that Russian troops carried out another surprise assault on Ukrainian positions in these two districts. The Ukrainian military was unprepared for these attacks, which caught them by surprise. Despite this, they were able to recover very quickly and were successful in unseating the Russian soldiers that were stationed in this region. Artillery batteries in Ukraine are concentrating their fire on a broad area. According to the most recent reports, Ukrainian artillery units reportedly fired on Russian positions in the areas of Luzernevka, Kordymwevka, Yahidny, and the Bawat city center. On the Luhansk front, there is also activity going on. The most current information indicates that Russian forces have resumed offensive operations in the Makivka region. In spite of having a numerical advantage, the Russian troops were unable to make any progress and were ultimately forced to retreat. So, let me ask you this, what are your thoughts? Do you believe that the conflict over Russia's frontline positions in Zaporizhia has been resolved? If the Ukrainian army obtains additional backing, may it make further advancements? What are your opinions on the recent events that have taken place on the front lines of Donetsk? I would ask that you let me know in the comments that I have read all of them and appreciate them.